Hi, and welcome to Protocol's virtual meetup. We launched Protocol to focus on the people, power, and politics of technology to arm you, the decision makers, with unbiased, fact-based news and analysis to help you navigate a world in constant change. In today's virtual meetup, we'll do just that, with Protocol's talented reporters, Issie Lapowsky and Emily Birnbaum, who continue to lead the way with their important coverage at the intersection of technology and policy. In addition, I'm thrilled to welcome Nikki Kristoff, Senior Vice President of Strategy and Government Relations at Salesforce. My thanks to you, Nikki, and Salesforce for your partnership in making today's conversation possible.
Thank you so much, Tammy, and thank you to Protocol for inviting Salesforce to host this virtual event. I know people might have a little bit of Zoom fatigue, but we have a great guest today. It's my pleasure to welcome Congressman Will Hurd, who's joining us from Texas. He'll talk to us about data and technology issues in the 116th Congress. Congressman Hurd is a former CIA officer, but he also majored in computer science at Texas A&M and professionally worked in the cybersecurity field. He was a lead co-sponsor of the Modernizing Government Technology Act and has been described as a leading voice on government technology issues in Congress. Thank you so much for being here today. We're grateful that you're taking the time, and I will turn it over to Issie and Emily.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Issie Lapowsky. I'm a senior reporter at Protocol, and I'm joined here with my colleague, Emily Birnbaum, and with Congressman Will Hurd. Thank you guys for being here. So we're planning on covering a lot of ground. We're going to talk about tech, policy, cybersecurity. But if you have any questions at home, wherever you're watching this, please just drop down into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and you can ask a question and we will pass them along. All right, so let's dive in. So Congressman, I wanted to start by talking about cybersecurity because this is a topic that you have a lot of expertise in and that you have passion for, and that the COVID-19 crisis is really raising a lot of new questions about. So I was hoping you could start by telling us about what some of the new urgent pressing threats are raised by this virus in the cybersecurity arena and what Congress is doing to try to address them.
Sure. I think what COVID-19 has shown us, nobody thought that some virus could bring the entire global economy to a standstill. And just like nobody thought a fire sale was possible, right? Where, you know, if anybody's watched Die Hard 4, I think it was Die Hard 4, right? Where it's like transportation, finance, you know, everything comes crumbling down at the same time. But maybe we need to rethink that about ensuring that we have the redundancy that we need in order to protect our critical infrastructure. What critical infrastructure is, how we define critical infrastructure is changing from this, right? Because, you know, now everybody's having to do Zoom, and, you know, if you're not able to have the resources to do that, then you're not going to be able to benefit. We talk a lot now about telemedicine, right? Mm-hmm. In parts of my district, my cell phone doesn't work, right? And so guess what? You're not going to be able to have telemedicine there. So how do we think about infrastructure? And so what are we trying to do about this? There's going to be another phase of support, and that support, you know, if we want to call it phase 4, I guess we're on, or actually I think it may be phase 5, is going to be some support to states and local communities. And the debate is going to be around what can those federal dollars be used at that state and municipality level. And one of those things I think it should be used for is to strengthening digital infrastructure and making sure we have the cybersecurity around it. We know right now that we're seeing advanced persistent threats going after hospitals, going after and trying to learn about what's happening in some major cities. It's happening in my hometown of San Antonio. So how do we make sure that we can provide federal dollars, right, to allow these folks to work on? And that's something I'm actually working on right now. It's basically a state and local modernization fund where it'd probably be one-time money. And if it's going to protect your infrastructure and it already has a federal connection, then you may be able to apply for this fund in order to do that. And so these are some of the conversations that are happening right now. And I think when people talk infrastructure. It's no longer just bridges, roads, locks, and dams. It's also, your computers, your telecommunications infrastructure as well.
And so obviously that covers the side of the equation with regard to government infrastructure, but you have all these companies right now with their entire workforce working from home, working on bring your own device. These are often not secured devices. Mark Zuckerberg just did a live stream talking about the future of remote work, and his live stream went down for reasons we don't quite know why. So what should these companies be doing to secure their internal infrastructure, to secure their employees who are now a distributed workforce?
Begin with the assumption of breach, right? An attacker is going to be able to get in. And so the question is, how quickly can you detect? How quickly can you quarantine? And how quickly can you push people off, right? That's the mindset that we have to be in. And this notion of who should be able to have access to certain things within your network, because you can't trust, because of bring your own device, right? You don't know what's on that endpoint. And so you have to assume that endpoint is corrupted. So trust protocols from a technical perspective is something that businesses are going to have to think through, because one, I expect, sometimes as an employee, I expect to be able to use my device, right? And then there's some responsibilities that come with that. And so I think that's how larger companies are going to have to think through that ability, and even like basics like VPN. Right? The good thing is still, if you do the basics, patch your software, have a 14-character password, and don't click on something you don't know anything from, you're going to protect yourself from 86% of the threats. But the other area where I think the federal government and the business sector can improve is information sharing on cyber threats. Unfortunately, right now, when it comes to information sharing, we still think like my old world in the intelligence community, and that we don't appreciate how perishable cybersecurity information is, or information on an attack may be. And we don't always share that as quickly. The federal government doesn't always share it as quickly as they could. And so that's one area how we improve that cooperation between the public and the private sector.
So one thing that we have heard from the federal government recently was that we're seeing some cyber threats come out of China with regard to trying to hack into vaccine-related information. What can you tell us about those attacks and the administration's response to them?
Sure. Look, this is based on the Chinese belief that there's going to be a first mover advantage of whoever gets the vaccine first. And so just like the Chinese for the last number of years, if not decades, have stolen information when it comes to our great technology companies, they're stealing it now, and they have been stealing IP when it comes in the pharmaceutical space as well. So I think that is that's the end motivation of getting to that vaccine first, because not only what we're seeing the Communist Party of China doing right now is they're trying to erode trust between the United States and all of our allies in other parts of the world. They're trying, early on they said that the coronavirus started in the US, that it started in Italy, that the US can't respond to this. They're lying about some of the responses that are happening in the United States, because they want to be seen, the Chinese want to be seen as, we're the ones that can help you after this. And right now, the Chinese recognize, one, they're concerned about their own populations' view on how they handle the crisis internally, but they're also looking at this as an opportunity to supercharge their efforts to become the sole hegemon by 2049. 2049 is 100 years of communist rule in mainland China, and they have said that they want to become the world superpower. And so they're using the chaos that's been created on COVID-19 to supercharge those efforts. You've seen them become even more aggressive with their disinformation campaigns. You see them become even more aggressive with the actual theft and trying to get into systems. And the response by the administration, look, they're attributing many of these attacks. Under the previous administration, I always had some disagreements about attribution. And if we may not know it was Colonel X from the MSS, but knowing that the attack came from the MSS, that general attribution is enough. And so I think attribution under this administration has been where it is, or in the essence, naming and shaming, so that we can talk about what the threat actually is.
So just talking about this threat from China and more about these disinformation campaigns. So you've been talking for a while about, charging China with engaging in a global disinformation campaign around the coronavirus and where it came from and our role in it. And so what do you think should be the role of social media companies in mediating, that kind of disinformation? Like, how do you think they've done so far? What more can they do? And then is there a role for Congress to step in, in the middle there?
Look, so this is the reason this debate around disinformation is so hard is because of First Amendment responsibilities and rights, right? Like, firm believer in that. You shouldn't have the federal government telling news entities what is truth or what is not, right? And so I think the folks that are using the platforms have a responsibility of providing tactics, techniques, and procedures that these folks that are doing these weaponized disinformation campaigns are doing. And a lot of that is happening, right? You're able to see how someone is creating a botnet or the equivalent of a botnet in social media. You can provide that information to the FBI, right? And so I think each one is having a decision on what is a political ad or what isn't a political ad. Those are debates for everybody, but one area that the government can improve right now today, because of DOJ statute, the FBI cannot search Twitter, open Twitter, twitter.com, and say shooting in San Antonio, right? They can't do that. Now, there is no presumption of privacy when you go on the open part of when you go on Twitter. And so why do we have rules that are preventing federal law enforcement to be able to do those kinds of things? So I think there's ways that we can improve that level of cooperation, but it's tricky because you never want the federal government telling, yes, don't violate the law, right? Obviously, but when it comes to speech, that's always going to be difficult. So it's hard for me to say give grade on A, B, C, or D, but it starts with, look, we all know, don't get into a car with a stranger, asterisk, unless it's Uber or Lyft, right? Why do we share information from people on social media that we have no clue who they are, right? And so there is some basic education that needs to be happening at all levels of our society to make us more, better consumers of information. And honestly, as an aside, this is one reason why I'm such a supporter of libraries, right? Sometimes people think libraries are old and antiquated, but librarians are playing a huge role in trying to help people be better consumers of digital information.
I just want to push back on that real quickly, though. When you talk about, you started that answer talking about the First Amendment and how big a supporter you are. And I think a lot of free speech advocates would say the reason we don't want the FBI monitoring Twitter for everything that somebody is saying is because that could chill free speech and that could stifle people's ability to speak freely, knowing that they're being watched. So what do you say to that?
So if I'm sitting in a park and an FBI officer is walking their dog and I'm going to say something like, I'm getting ready to shoot somebody, that's not a violation of someone's, because you're in a public space, right? And so twitter.com is not viewed, there's not a presumption of privacy when it comes to that. Now, if I have a protected, I have a Facebook account that's not open, it's public, there's some different opinions there. But when it comes to something that is part of the public square, the presumption of privacy doesn't exist there. And I think that is most of the privacy advocates would probably would agree with that. So I'm, that's a very basic thing that I think we should all agree on just the stuff that's already public, right? I'm not even getting to private related things. We can talk about how even now the FBI can search your email records if they're like 30 days old or something like that because of old ECPA laws from that were put in place when Top Gun first came out. So there's other tools that I would say, I think that needs a change, right? Because we've come a long way since 1996. But if somebody is saying I'm going to kill somebody on Twitter, law enforcement should be able to look for that.
So just to shift gears a little bit on the sort of like China tech race. So a lot of a big group of your House Republican colleagues, I think last week, put out this expansive package of bills sort of aimed at giving the US a leg up in the race with China, in the tech race with China. And so, part of the issue is that China, at some level has an advantage because its technological initiatives are largely fully backed by the government. So I think today there was reporting that the Chinese government is prepared to funnel $1 trillion into the economy to, bolster things like artificial intelligence and like wireless networks. So, what do you think Congress and the broader administration need to prioritize right now to ensure that the US has a real shot at winning this so-called race, if you even, by that framing?
No, look, I do, and it is a race, right? The Chinese have made it very clear. This is not Will Hurd's opinion. This is not me collecting intelligence on them. This is them writing it for themselves. Their goal is to become the world leader in 10 of the future technology spaces, right? It's artificial intelligence, it's quantum, it's machine learning, right? Advanced optics, things like this, right? They've made it very clear. And they can move all their factors of production in one direction. We know that. So what should the US be doing? If a US company or investor can't do something in China, then why are we allowing a Chinese company or investor do that here in the United States of America, right? If we treat Alibaba in the United States as an American company, but Amazon or Salesforce is not treated as a Chinese company in China, then why are we not allowing that true reciprocity, right? And so I think it starts with that. There is legislation that's passed the Senate, I think this week or end of last week, that said, if you can't follow US accounting practices, guess what? You can't be listed on the US exchanges. Well, I'm like, why wasn't that the rule in the first place? Number one, because that seems pretty straightforward. And that was passed in an overwhelmingly bipartisan way. Now, I think a good example of this, of what should we be doing, is around 5G specifically. Why does 5G matter? And look, you're the folks that participate in y'all's meetups are probably sophisticated consumers of information. And I always have to tell when I'm crisscrossing this, why does 5G matter? Yeah, it's gonna be great to download season 2 of The Mandalorian, in 5 seconds, right? But the latency, right? I do something on my phone, it hits the cloud, comes back, the amount of time it takes for that to happen, right? In 5G, we're gonna be able to do that in like 10 nanoseconds. What does 10 nanoseconds matter? Our thoughts are like 7 nanoseconds, right? So it's gonna allow us to have the entire power of the internet in front of us. The Chinese are ahead with Huawei because it's backed by the federal government. There's only 3 other providers that we all know: Samsung, Nokia, and I knew I was gonna do this. I'm gonna have my oops moment. The third, we all know the third. Somebody will probably put that on. Ericsson. And so how can we be working with our other allies, right, to make sure that there's a true competitor against Huawei? Can the federal government be doing contracts for 10 years, right? How do we leverage OPIC, the overseas, OPIC has a new name now, but it's our version of the One Belt, One Road initiative. How are we putting State Department aid? How do we have USAID aid? How do we put all of these things together and make sure that we're using our allies and helping our allies provide a service in some of these countries, right? Like, that's where we should be going to array all of our resources together. And we're not, it's all kind of haphazard. And the Chinese, this is what happens when you have an authoritarian government. But I will always say this: they may be able to get somewhere first, but American creativity, entrepreneurship, openness is always going to win the day.
Are you frustrated that the Trump administration's approach on 5G and on, creating a so-called Huawei competitor has been somewhat scattershot and sort of like complicated by internal fights, over the last couple of years?
So you can't put 5G on his feet, because this 5G debate should have happened 20 years ago, right? And so we should have had the foresight back then in order to do that. I think, look, I've disagreed on some of the China policy, but the threat of China, I do agree with. And it's complicated, right? So can you create a tax code that helps, any American dealing in the 5G space in order to, to make sure that we're being competitive, right? Then that's going to come into a debate about using your tax code for policy, right? So this is broader than just what the executive branch is doing. It's some of these debates that we're having in Congress as well. And look, one of the problems you're seeing about 5G adoption at a local level is some cities and counties are using the fact that you need more 5G antennas, right, as an ATM machine. And they're putting all these crazy regulations and charging more than probably necessary in order to do that deployment, because they look at it as an opportunity. And so there's a local government issue when it comes to 5G deployment as well too. So I think there's a lot of people in that stack that if we could all come together, and so knowing how we catch up, right? Because I would say best case scenario, we're tied. More likely, they're advanced. And I've had senior cybersecurity officials from our European allies basically say, guys, y'all lost the battle on 5G. Y'all need to be thinking about 6G.
I want to turn to one of our questions in the Q&A box. This is from Tara Hairston. She's asking, what is your reaction to the Cybersecurity Solarium Commission's report? How do you see the implementation of its various recommendations? And do you have any thoughts on how those recommendations should be prioritized? Maybe you could give a little context for viewers who don't understand.
Sure. Cyber Solarium report was something Congress passed. It was a bipartisan, nonpartisan would probably be a better way to put it, on, create a entity that looks at how do we improve cybersecurity at all levels of government. And a number of industry folks, congressional folks, people, old and current people in the executive branch got together to talk about some of these findings. And to be honest, I think the product they produced, I haven't found many people that are like, oh, that's a terrible idea. It's all stuff that actually makes a lot of sense. And what they did that was what they did well was they had the right members of Congress on that Solarium to drive the legislation. And so there's probably been a dozen pieces of legislation that are going to move because the right people were on that commission who run those subcommittees or who are on those committees of jurisdiction. So you're going to see some actual laws come out of that. Unfortunately, the report came out literally when COVID hit, right? And so a lot of folks may not have known about it, but there's art like one of the findings that's prescient was saying that the federal government needs to do more to work with state and local entities on modernizing, their infrastructure. Hello. Exactly, right? And honestly, it's that language that I'm using to work on some of this legislation. I'll be working with the folks on the Solarium to make that happen. But it's been a great effort, and I think this area of cybersecurity is probably the last. That's cybersecurity and the threat of China is still a bipartisan topic and issue in Congress.
So I wanted to talk, we touched on data privacy a little bit earlier. It seems like for the last couple of years, we've seen this shift toward embracing data privacy in Congress and in the states with the passage of CCPA, and even some tech companies have been calling for federal privacy legislation. But now this crisis seems to be reversing a lot of that and sparking this new willingness to use technology and data to stop the spread of the virus. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the role that you think is appropriate for tech companies and for data to play in contact tracing in the public, and then also monitoring employees when they go back to the workplace.
So what does privacy even mean anymore? Right? We use that phrase, and it's like it means different things for different people. And I try to break it down real simple. I own my data, right? Like, I use, what was the credit rating agency that had the major breach? What, 24 million?
I don't want to say the wrong one.
Right. No, I always say the wrong one. Well, we all know, right?
Equifax.
Thank you, Nikki. Did anybody on this call opt in to provide information to Equifax? The answer is no, right? And so ultimately, I think it starts with it's my information. I get to decide what I want to do with it, right? And what framework do you put in place in order to do that? And why is this? Why do we have to get this right? Before the European law came in place about privacy, we were like, this is going to be terrible. And then we realized, whoa, I go to a lot of websites that have cookies, and so the reason we have to have, I think, starts with a national breach standard. This is what happens if data is breached. And then to say, these are the kinds of things that need to be protected and how it's protected. Because if we don't put that in place, the ability to really move into the cloud so that we can have true artificial intelligence and totally unlock that data is not going to be possible. And whoever masters artificial intelligence is going to master the world. That is, I think, the only thing I agree with the Russian president on. And so if we don't have those rules in place, it's going to prevent us from being able to leverage data in the right way. And so you come specifically to contact tracing. Our public health system in the United States is actually a local system. What happens here in Bexar County, where San Antonio is very different than what happens in Boston. And so that tool that Google and Apple just came out with today is going to be a tool that other people adopt. And I think it starts with, my information needs to reside on my device, and I need to have the ability to share that information in a secure way with who I want to share that to, whether that's to get on a plane or not. And so we can achieve both. We can achieve use of data and the protection of privacy at the same time. We need to stop acting like these are two things that are mutually exclusive.
So you're talking about Apple and Google's contact tracing project. There's sort of this concern that if the federal government doesn't get behind it, or if, the CDC or a top public health agency doesn't explicitly get behind it, then it's just not going to work that well in terms of digital contact tracing, is what I'm referring to. If it goes state by state, that it just might not be as effective. So it's sort of like other countries with different structures of government,
Sure.
Might be able to harness this technology better. And it might just not really do that much in our country. So, what do you make of that? Do you share that concern?
Well, I think those debates fall on an ideological spectrum of, do you believe in local control or not, right? And so, I think adoption will probably happen quicker if an enterprising, head of the local health agency is able to adopt something, right? And then if someone shows it's working, then other people can adopt it that way. Then rather than having this one size fits all solution that comes down from someone at CDC. Now, CDC and these, look, even a NIST should be able to say, hey, here are some of the things you should be doing that a system should have. These are some of the privacy protections that you should be able to use, right? And provide that framework. But when it comes to the implementation, I think that allowing, how many cities are there in the United States of America? How many counties are there in the United States of America? Letting all those entrepreneurial labs figure out how to best use it. And guess what? When somebody gets it right, it's going to get adopted. And then we're going to see something like that become a standard. And I always use Ethernet and token ring as an example, right? Most of the people already don't know what token ring is. And it's like, there was another competitor to Ethernet. We didn't have to say everybody should use Ethernet. It became the de facto standard. And we have examples, VHS and Beta as those cases. So I think allowing that openness is the way we're going to adopt it. And we're not South Korea because they're way smaller than us. And it's not just it's not how our system of government is organized in a federal system.
Okay.
I think we're running short on time, but I just wanted to ask one last question, which is, you are one of the sort of tech minds in the House. I know that there are a few of your Republican colleagues who are going to be leaving, as are you, at the end of this year, who have sort of been the standard bearers for tech in the House. So how confident are you in your colleagues' ability to carry these issues forward once you're no longer there?
Well, one, I appreciate the vote of confidence, but I will say this: what I'm trying to do is, sometimes everyone thinks we need to have a centralized entity on technology. No, everybody should be involved in technology. So the next Congress, whoever is doing the oversight plans for Congress, should include how is that part of the government they're overseeing adopting technology. How are they using artificial intelligence? How are they making sure data is available that's also being protected? Robin Kelly, who is a Democrat from Illinois, and I are working with the Bipartisan Policy Center on a national strategy for artificial intelligence. And we've done a number of convenings, and we're gonna be coming out with papers real soon on the things that we've learned. And like the cyberspace Solarium, come out with legislation that includes this national strategy, because we wanna make sure that every entity is focused on this. Technology is not a destination, it is a tool. Every entity should be doing it. Every oversight and regulatory agency should be focused on that. And so if you do that, then you force everybody to do it, and it doesn't have to be centralized in a handful of people that may have a computer science degree.
Got it. Well, thank you, Congressman, for joining us. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Salesforce. And to everybody who's watching, we're going to have another virtual meetup in 2 weeks. It's June 4th at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. And that conversation is going to be moderated by our editor at large, David Pierce.
And if you're not following me, I'm Hurd on the Hill on all the social media.
Yes, good follow recommendation. Thanks, everybody.